In the summer of 1854, in the sweltering heat of Louisiana Parish, a wedding took place that left even the cruelest men silent. A plantation owner stood at the altar, and beside him, his enslaved cook, a woman mocked for her size. But what followed was no love story. It was a wager, a humiliation, and, some say, the beginning of a curse that consumed not just one family, but an entire town. The story begins with Charles R. Whitfield, a planter whose family had long ruled a stretch of sugarcane fields carved from swampland. The Whitfields were known for their cruelty, their wealth, and their obsession with spectacle. When Charles, the youngest son, wagered his inheritance in a drunken card game, he was dared by his peers to marry someone unthinkable, Martha, the plantation's obese cook. She was known not just for her food, but for her silence. She never spoke unless spoken to, and some claimed her voice was not her own, but something borrowed, something hidden. Witnesses said that on the night of the wedding, the church lanterns flickered in unnatural patterns, as though the air itself was thick with resistance. The pastor who officiated, an aging man named Reverend Alcott, later wrote in his diary that when Martha lifted her veil, the congregation swore they smelled smoke, though no candles had burned near her. The marriage was meant as humiliation, a grotesque joke played on a woman stripped of dignity. But soon, children began whispering that Martha's laughter carried voices that weren't hers. Slaves in the quarter spoke of strange knocks in the cookhouse, of food that spoiled overnight, of shadows that lingered too long on the walls. And within weeks, the Whitfield family began to disappear. After the wedding, Charles brought Martha into the Whitfield mansion, a home that already carried its share of whispered curses. Built on the bones of a failed Jesuit mission, the house was known locally as the Hollow House, for its corridors seemed to carry sound in unnatural ways. Footsteps were heard long after their owners had stopped walking, and mirrors had long ago been removed. Every single one. Charles's father had ordered them smashed decades earlier, after guests claimed reflections did not match the movements of the living. The shards were buried beneath the sugarcane rows, a detail forgotten except by the old women in the quarters who warned their children never to dig too deep. Martha was placed in the east wing, the part of the mansion where the walls peeled with damp and where no servant wished to linger. Within nights, her laughter echoed down the halls, not bright or innocent, but layered, as though several people were laughing at once. When Charles confronted her, demanding silence, she is said to have whispered, "This house remembers more than you think." The slaves began to avoid her. The overseer, a cruel man named Candler, reported that cattle grew sick if they ate food she cooked. The dogs would not approach her. And still, Charles, bound by the wager, mocked by his peers, kept her in the house. Within a month, Charles's elder brother vanished. His boots were found in the hallway outside Martha's room, but his body was never recovered. His wife claimed she saw him fold into the wall, as though the plaster itself had swallowed him. The Whitfields hushed the matter. They told the town he had left for New Orleans. But Reverend Alcott, in his diary, wrote a single line that was never meant to be read. She brought no veil to this marriage. She brought a mouth of many voices. The cookhouse had always been a place of comfort on the Whitfield plantation. It was where the enslaved gathered to share what little warmth they could, trading food, prayers, and whispered hopes. But when Martha moved into the big house, the cookhouse grew strangely silent. The fires would not stay lit. Pots cracked for no reason. And worst of all, voices were heard where no one stood. A slave named Josiah recalled that if you leaned too close to the cookhouse door, you could hear people praying in languages no one had spoken for centuries. Sometimes the prayers stopped mid-sentence, followed by the sound of chewing. Charles ordered the cookhouse locked after servants refused to step inside. Yet on nights when the cane fields rustled with swamp wind, the locked doors would rattle as though something inside demanded to be fed. A white neighbor, curious and cruel, attempted to break in one evening to prove nothing was amiss. He was never seen again. Only his hat was found, bent in half and soaked with grease. The cookhouse became a forbidden zone, a place the Whitfields ignored but never forgot. Children of the enslaved whispered that Martha did not cook food, but something else. Something meant not for the living, but for the house itself. Years later, when Federal soldiers passed through during the Civil War, one captain wrote his field notes about a strange oven with markings not made by any Christian hand. His men refused to eat bread baked on the property. Some said the dough itself seemed to breathe. Even after the war, even after freedom was declared, the former slaves spoke of Martha's cookhouse with one phrase only. It never cooled down. Candler, the overseer, prided himself on his brutality. He believed Martha's marriage to Charles made her fair game for his cruelty. He mocked her size, called her a pig, and once spat into her stew to prove dominance. 3 nights later, Candler vanished. His quarters were found in disarray, the walls streaked with dark film that smelled of lard. His whip was discovered in the sugarcane rows, but his body was never recovered. The slaves claimed to hear him screaming long after he was gone, his voice echoing through the cane like wind over broken glass. Charles dismissed it as drunken misadventure, but Reverend Alcott wrote otherwise. The overseer's absence has silenced the whip, but in its place we hear a new lash, one of mouse uncounted. The disappearance spread fear. Workers refused to enter the fields after dusk. Cane stalks were found bent into symbols, some resembling twisted human figures. At night, shadows moved against the house as though walking on ceilings, not earth. One field hand, cornered by Charles's fury, finally admitted what others feared to say. She feeds the house, and the house eats. By winter, even Charles had grown uneasy. He ordered a priest from New Orleans to bless the home. The man stayed only one night, leaving before dawn without taking his pay. His final words to Charles were said to be, "This place was never yours. It was built for hungers you cannot satisfy." After that, Charles stopped sleeping in the east wing. He drank heavily, avoided Martha, and began pacing the halls late at night with a pistol in his hand. But Martha never flinched. She only laughed, her voice splitting into echoes that seemed to crawl through the floorboards. By 1856, rumors spread that Martha was pregnant. The town whispered with disgust, mocking Charles and calling the marriage a stain on white society. But within the house, the whispers turned darker. Martha swelled, but not as women do. Her belly rose and fell in odd patterns, like waves under cloth. Midwives brought in by force refused to touch her, swearing they could feel something moving beneath her skin, not like a child, but like many small hands pressing outward at once. When the time came, no cry of an infant was heard. Instead, those in the quarter said they heard a deep, wet exhale that shook the windows. Charles locked the doors for 3 days. When he emerged, his hair had gone gray at the temples, and he never spoke of what had been born. Some claimed the bundle was buried beneath the sugarcane rows, marked only by a circle of broken glass. Others swore they saw a small figure darting to the halls at night, never in full view, but always accompanied by a strange dragging sound. The slaves avoided the house entirely, saying the laughter now came not only from Martha, but from something smaller, something that clicked and gurgled like boiling fat. The town grew uneasy. The Whitfields, once arrogant and untouchable, had become a subject of pity and fear. Children dared each other to run past the plantation gates, claiming that if you listened closely, you could hear an infant crying, but the sound always ended in a man's voice laughing. Reverend Alcott, now ill and weakened, confessed in his final sermon before fleeing the parish. No wedding unites them. No birth redeems them. What they brought forth was not meant for any cradle. In 1860, a fire consumed the parish orphanage. 40 children died, their screams carrying across the cane fields as the night sky glowed red. The fire was ruled accidental, but townsfolk whispered it was Martha's doing. Witnesses swore they saw her watching from the plantation gates, her expression calm as embers lit her face. One survivor, a girl named Ruth, claimed she saw Martha inside the orphanage hours before the fire, standing at the foot of every bed, humming. Strangely, none of the children's bodies were recovered. The fire left ashes, nails, and melted frames, but no bones. It was said the smell of pork hung in the air for weeks, making townspeople gag as they passed. The parish blamed Charles, accused him of negligence, but he protested innocence. He begged the sheriff to believe him, saying his wife kept ovens where no ovens should be. That same week, children in town began waking in the night, screaming that a woman was standing in the corner of their rooms. Parents swore no one was there, yet the children described her the same way, large, silent, and smiling with too many teeth. The parish records from that year list over a dozen disappearances of children. Most were ruled as runaways. But private letters from townsfolk reveal a different story. Strange knocking in attics, laughter behind walls, and meals left on tables going rancid within minutes. After the fire, the townspeople refused to look Martha in the eye. They whispered that the Whitfield plantation had become an orphanage of its own, not for the living but for something else. When the Civil War broke out, Union troops marched through Louisiana, burning plantations and freeing slaves. But when they reached the Whitfield estate, they hesitated. Soldiers reported hearing cries from the fields, though no one was there. Horses refused to enter the gates. A colonel, stubborn and proud, ordered men inside. Only 3 returned. They spoke of corridors that twisted into dead ends, of walls that bled sugar like syrup, of a woman laughing in every room. The Whitfield house was left standing. Soldiers set fire to it twice, but the flames died before reaching the roof. One officer wrote bitterly, "The house itself rejects the flame. It is not wood, but something older wearing with his skin." Charles, now frail and paranoid, begged the soldiers to take Martha away. They refused, saying she did not appear bound. She walked the halls freely, smiling at the men with a gaze that made even armed soldiers retreat. After the war, the plantation fell into ruin. The cane fields rotted, the overseer's quarters collapsed, and the Whitfields were bankrupt. But Martha remained. Freed slaves refused to return, warning others never to step foot on Whitfield land. Yet former children of the orphanage, grown now and broken, swore they could hear whispers calling them back at night. Some returned. None were seen again. The parish kept silent. History passed the Whitfields by, as though erasing them from memory. But silence was never safety. In the years that followed, silence itself became a warning. Reverend Alcott fled the parish during the war, leaving behind his church. He died in 1872, but his belongings were shipped back to Louisiana for cataloging. Among them was his diary. The townsfolk expected sermons, confessions, scripture. Instead, they found frantic notes about the Whitfields. He described Martha as a vessel, a table set for unclean guests, and the mouth that opened the house. In one passage, he wrote, "She is not fat, she is full, and what fills her is not for us." The diary spread unease. Families burned their copies of Whitfield ledgers, afraid to be tied to the cursed land. The church tried to suppress the book, but copies were made in secret. One line terrified readers most. "She does not cook for us, she cooks for the walls." And the walls are never satisfied. By 1880, the parish had lost nearly half its population to migration. Those who remained kept their children inside after dark, praying each night with doors barred. They whispered that if you looked toward the Whitfield house too long, you might see lanterns glowing in the windows, though no one had lived there in years. But records show someone remained. Bills of flour, pork fat, and salt were paid for in cash well into the 1890s. Signed only with the initial M, the diary became a cursed object. Any who read it reported dreams of being cooked alive, roasted and basted by unseen hands. One farmer tore his own skin, screaming, "I'm done! I'm done!" as if he were meat on a spit. The church locked the diary away, but the Whitfield house still stood, patient, waiting. By the 1890s, the plantation was a ruin, yet children still dared each other to play near its iron gates. They said if you pressed your ear against the bars, you could hear Martha singing lullabies in a voice too sweet to belong to her. One group of boys disappeared in 1894. Only their shoes were found, neatly arranged in a circle by the gate. Their mothers swore they heard chewing in the night, a wet, grinding sound that came from their chimneys. One woman claimed she found teeth in her fireplace, teeth too small to belong to adults. The sheriff refused to investigate. He said the land was cursed and should be left to rot. Yet still more children disappeared. Each time their shoes returned. Locals began to avoid the road altogether. Travelers reported hearing knocks on their carriage doors when passing by at night, only to see no one there. Some swore a large woman walked beside them, matching pace, whispering promises of warm meals and safe beds. But if anyone accepted her invitation, they were never seen again. One newspaper ran a headline in 1897, "Parish children vanish. Is the Whitfield place to blame?" The article was suppressed within days. The editor's office caught fire that same week, destroying every copy. By century's end, the Whitfield plantation had become folklore, a ghost story told to frighten children. But those who lived closest knew better. They claimed the laughter still came on humid nights, carried by cane fields long dead. And always it sounded like more than one voice. In 1901, the Whitfield estate was sold. Charles was long dead, his body found shriveled in his bed, mouth stretched as if screaming. Martha had not been seen in years, though some whispered she still wandered the halls. The buyer was a banker from New Orleans, eager to strip the land for lumber. He brought crews, men hardened from city slums, unafraid of superstition. They lasted 1 week. The men complained of voices in the rafters, laughter in the walls, and food turning sour before they could eat it. One worker swore a woman fed him stew at night, but when he awoke, his mouth was full of ashes. When the banker arrived to inspect the work, he found the men gone. Tools were abandoned. The air smelled of smoke. And on the dining room table, bowls were set, each filled with teeth. The banker fled. He signed the deed back to the parish and never returned. The house remained untouched, its windows boarded, its gates locked, but the parish never demolished it. Some said they tried, but every crew refused. Others claimed the land could not be bought, that deeds burned to ash when signed. In town, people began to notice their bread rising too fast, their meat spoiling overnight, their children waking hungry no matter how much they ate. The church blamed poor storage. The elders whispered otherwise. They said the Whitfield cook was feeding again. By 1910, sleep itself had become scarce in the parish. Families complained of waking at the same hour each night, 3:17 a.m., with the smell of roasting meat thick in their rooms. Doctors called it mass hysteria. Priests called it temptation. But mothers swore they saw their children wander in the halls, eyes closed, mouths open as if chewing in their dreams. One boy was found outside, walking barefoot toward the Whitfield gates. When shaken awake, he screamed, "She's waiting at the table." The parish fell into decline. Crops rotted. Businesses closed. People starved though food was plentiful. It was as if hunger itself had been cursed upon them. A doctor from Baton Rouge arrived to investigate. He stayed 3 nights, documenting strange events. Food molding instantly, clock stopping at 3:17, and the sound of footsteps pacing his room though he locked his door. On the fourth night, he vanished. His journal was found, ending with one unfinished line. "She is cooking me now." After that, no outsider came willingly. The parish began losing entire families. Some fled. Others simply vanished. Houses stood empty, meals left half-eaten, fires still warm. The sheriff claimed bandits were to blame, but the old women shook their heads. Sheriff Dugan was the last authority left in the parish by 1912. A proud man, he dismissed all whispers of curses, calling them slave superstition and old wives' gossip. To prove his point, he organized a dinner inside the Whitfield house. He invited townsfolk, priests, and his deputies. They entered the long-abandoned dining room, dust thick on the table. And yet, when the sheriff lit his lantern, the table was already set. Platters of roasted meat, bowls of buttered corn, steaming loaves of bread. The guests were horrified, but the sheriff laughed. He carved a roast, placed a dripping slice on his plate, and forced others to eat. Hours later, screams echoed through town. The sheriff and his guests were found writhing in the street, their mouths tearing open as if something inside demanded to crawl out. By dawn, only scraps of flesh remained, scattered like table leavings. No one entered the house again. The gates were locked. The name Whitfield was struck from parish records. But every year after, on the same date, the townsfolk swore they smelled a feast roasting on the night wind. In 1921, outsiders reopened the Whitfield mansion, not as a home, but as a boarding school for troubled girls. The investors, northern men, dismissed local warnings as foolish superstition. They installed beds in the east wing, desks in the halls, and a chapel in the old dining room. For a time, the school seemed ordinary, but the girls began changing. They ate endlessly yet grew thin. At night, they sang in their sleep, voices blending into strange hymns that carried through the cane. Teachers reported pots of stew cooking themselves in the kitchens, though no one was there. The headmistress kept strict order, but within months, her staff vanished one by one. The girls would only say, they were taking a supper. One visiting inspector fled after a week, claiming he saw the girls' shadows bending differently from their bodies. He swore one shadow was laughing while its owner wept. The school closed abruptly in 1923. Parents received no explanation. Their daughters were returned silent, refusing to eat food not served on pewter plates. Many would never marry, never bear children. Some disappeared entirely. When asked, they would only whisper one word, cookhouse. By the late 1920s, the curse no longer belonged to the Whitfield estate alone. Hunger swept through the parish like a disease. Families devoured meals yet wasted away. Livestock starved though feed was abundant. Babies cried through the night, their bellies swollen with emptiness. Doctors sent shipments of medicine, but nothing cured it. Priests fasted, but the hunger only grew. The oldest freed slaves warned the townsfolk, she has left the house. She walks now. And indeed, sightings of Martha returned. A large woman, dressed in black, carrying an iron pot, seen standing by crossroads, offering food to travelers. Some accepted, none returned. By 1930, entire neighborhoods were abandoned. The parish shrank into a skeleton of itself. Those who survived kept bread locked away, wrapped in scripture. They taught their children never to eat at strangers' tables, never to accept stew from anyone whose face was hidden. But still, the hunger persisted. One of the few survivors of the Whitfield School, a girl named Agnes, grew into a nun. In 1934, she confessed her story to a visiting priest. She said Martha had come to the dormitories each night, sitting at the foot of their beds, humming. The girls were not afraid at first. She smelled of butter and sugar, warmth and comfort. But soon the smell turned rancid. Her breath grew sour, her humming deeper, layered with other voices. Agnes swore she once saw Martha lift her gown to reveal not flesh, but mouths, dozens of them, gasping, chewing, whispering. The priest dismissed her story, calling it hysteria. But Agnes disappeared soon after, leaving only her rosary coiled in a bowl of lard. Her convent burned down a year later. The surviving sisters said the flames smelled of roasted pork. The Great Depression hit Louisiana hard, but the parish was worse than anywhere else. Families starved despite government rations. Relief workers sent trucks of food, yet by the time it arrived, it had spoiled. Reporters came, curious about the mystery. Few returned. Those who did spoke of strange women feeding them meals in their dreams, only for them to wake with mouths full of ash. One reporter published a single article before hanging himself. His words, "The cookhouse never went cold. It never will." That year, abandoned houses outnumbered the living. Parish maps stopped being updated. Officials erased it from census records. But the Whitfield mansion still stood. Travelers passing through at night swore its windows glowed with lantern light, and that the smell of meat carried on the wind for miles. By 1940, only one family remained near the Whitfield land. The Dyers, poor sharecroppers with nowhere else to go. They claimed the curse was exaggeration, a superstition to keep outsiders away. For a while they survived. They grew corn, raised pigs, lived quietly. Then, one by one, their pigs vanished. The corn rotted on the stalk, and their youngest daughter began waking at night, speaking in voices not her own. Neighbors swore they heard laughter from the Dyer house, echoing too loud for one family. One night, the house went silent. When neighbors finally entered, they found the table set for 6. Each plate was full. Each chair was empty. The food was still warm. The Dyers were never seen again. After the Dyers, the parish finally acted. In 1943, county officials arrived with chains, nails, and holy water. They boarded the Whitfield mansion shut, sealing every door and window. A priest circled the property, chanting prayers. But the boards warped overnight, nails bending outward as if pushed from inside. The priest was found days later, drowned in a vat of grease in the rectory. Still, the officials declared the job complete. They marked the property condemned. Locals whispered that at night. They still saw lanterns glowing through the cracks, as though a feast continued behind the boards. The house remained sealed, but never silent. On humid nights, laughter still drifted across the fields. By the late 1940s, the parish was nearly gone. Maps no longer named it. Families avoided speaking of it. The government claimed it had been reclaimed by swamp, but truck drivers passing through told other stories. They swore they saw a figure standing by the road at night, offering food. They described the same woman, large, silent, carrying an iron pot. Some men accepted. They were never seen again. The Whitfield name was erased from records. The church denied Reverend Alcott ever existed. And yet, old diaries and letters still surface, each repeating the same theme: a marriage that should never have happened, a cookhouse that never went cold, and a hunger that spread like rot. The parish did not vanish. It was swallowed. Today, the Whitfield Plantation no longer appears on maps. The parish is a ghost, erased from census and history alike. But truckers still whisper. Hikers still vanish. And every so often, a traveler returns raving about a warm meal, a welcoming smile, and laughter that never ended. What began as a cruel bet in 1854 became something far worse. A ritual, a covenant between a woman mocked for her body and a house built to consume. Whether Martha was victim or vessel, no one can say. But the record is clear. Once she entered the Whitfield home, nothing left it the same. They called it a marriage, but it was a feeding, and it never ended. Even now, if you drive the back roads of Louisiana, keep your windows shut. If you smell roasting meat where no kitchen stands, do not follow it. And if a woman offers you food on a dark road, do not take it, because the cookhouse never went cold, and it never will.